Deaf community of Reddit. What are the stereotypical alcohol-induced communication errors when signing with a drunk person? My mom would always get giggly and have a hard time getting through a story clearly. Kind of like when hearing people are laughing and it's hard for them to get to their point. Also just general sloppiness. LOL signs bleed into each other and you have to repeat what you're signing more. My in-laws are hearing impaired. In-laws are from Taiwan. In-laws sign a mixture of Chinese and Taiwanese sign. In-laws moved to the US 30 plus years ago and learned ASL. Father-in-law decided to teach me his version of sign, a mixture of all three languages. Since the family is the only people I sign to, it's the only sign I know. Now to answer your question, it's a lot easier to sign to the wifey in certain venues, bars, clubs, over long distances. Wifey was holding our seats, and we were signing back and forth while I tried to make my way to the bar to get a few drinks. I could tell that a few people who knew sign were looking at our conversation and wondering what in the hell we were saying to each other. I am sure some figured out that it was a foreign language, but I could tell a few were captivated. Thinking I would get a few laughs, I told the wifey that I had to use the restroom. Specifically, I have to poop, and that's when they lost it. As it turns out, the Chinese-Taiwanese sign for poop is the same as the ASL sign for giving birth. Pretty much translates. Made some good friends that night, and they agreed to start using the sign for birth for number 2. I wasn't drunk for this, but when I met my girlfriend I hadn't practiced signing in about 4 or 5 years, despite being fluent before that. Early on in the relationship, I was trying to call her perfect but I accidentally used the sign for France. You are France. A year later, we still describe each other as France when we're flirting in texts, voiced English, and sign. My sister is with degenerative hearing and will eventually be completely deaf. But when she's drunk she will switch between verbally speaking and signing. It's hilarious when she's around people other than her husband, our family, and they don't sign because she'll get increasingly frustrated when people can't keep up with the signing and verbal words until she remembers most people don't sign. Then she flushes all the way up to her ears and immediately drunkenly stumbles away from the social situation. My cousin is deaf and tells me of how she forgot the sign for slap so completely unprompted, hauled off and slapped the guy she was chatting with and then kept going. So this cat is waving around all like a wizard, then the other cat just POW to the little one and what? Also, dropping things she's holding in order to sign, and signing to people she knows don't sign, then getting confused, annoyed and signing slowly and very carefully instead of grabbing her phone to write. It's like no, dummy, like the I swatter. So, I am not deaf, and I already posted this as a response to another comment, but I thought this would add to the overall conversation. My cousin is deaf, and he says hearing people sign better when we're drunk. When we're sober, we try too hard to make all of our signs perfect. That makes us sign slowly, which can be frustrating for them to keep up with. When we're drunk, we don't care, so we sign fast. We make more mistakes, but he almost always knows what we mean. I am not deaf, but I took ASL in college. When I got to my second year of ASL we had to go to deaf immersion events to sign with deaf people to learn about the deaf culture. One of these events was at a bar. I had had a few drinks and I signing away with some deaf people I made friends with in the past. I am killing it in my sign language. Finger spelling like a champ and sighing just as fast as anyone there. We are having a great time telling jokes and drinking when this amazingly hot woman comes up to our group. She was about my age, in her early 20s was my guess. She signs hello. My name is Ashley, it's nice to meet you. I sign back hello. My name is Madaville Fish, it's nice to meet you. I see everyone's eyes get as big as dinner plates, and this look of absolute horror crosses her face. She turns around and leaves. Turns out I didn't say hello. My name is Madaville Fish, it's nice to meet you. I said, hello. My name is Madaville Fish, it's nice to duck you. The sign for meet and duck is the difference of a finger. What I want to know is if sign language users eavesdrop on other sign language users' conversations. I learned sign language at one college and eventually transferred to another school. There was one deaf kid in the program and there was an interpreter in all his classes to, well, interpret for him. I would eavesdrop quite often in a couple of classes. In one marketing class, The interpreter was telling the deaf student about his night out the previous evening and how drunk he got, and started describing the girl he met and what he did when they got home. The deaf student, I think, accidentally vocalized, or the teacher looked at him and his expression didn't fit the material, or something. But the teacher started asking questions. As I remember, it was 25 years ago. The interpreter got him out of trouble, but it was one of the funniest exchanges I'd ever seen. There's a pretty large deaf community around Gallaudet University, which is also near some popular dance clubs and bars in DC. Can't tell if they have translation issues once drunk, but they have the upper hand at communicating on a loud dance floor. I was at uni with a pair of siblings who knew sign language. I can't remember if one of them was born deaf or a third sibling was, but one of the two. They would just sign drink orders at each other over crowds. It was great. One time we were at a concert and they did it, and this high dude next to us was like, "Holy it, did you just cast a spell?" Yup, it's called summon booze. Hearing child of deaf parents and deaf siblings here. In high school, I once came home from a party intoxicated and trying to act as sober as I could. I walked into my house hoping everyone was asleep, but of course my dad stayed up for me. I was signing to my dad after he asked how my night was, and it was like 10 pounds weights tied to my wrists. Oh, and I dropped my phone that was in my hand. Safe to say I was grounded for the next weekend. I am not deaf, but I feel it necessary to share simply for the humor. A family I knew back in the late 70s had twin brothers that were deaf and mute. Apparently neither could read lips either. However, they were both good looking kids about 19 years old. Also great athletes. Skiing and soccer were their games. We were in a bar one night near a ski resort in Western NY. The place was packed. Two snow bunnies came in and tried to talk to them, but quickly learned communication was going to be an issue. I knew hardly any sign and I had no idea where their brother was. He was not deaf or mute. I explained to the girls and they went to sit at a table. So one of the twins came over to me, shrugging his shoulders and pointing at the girls. I gave him a napkin and a pencil. They write on the napkin and walk over to the table where the girls were sitting. They read what was on the napkin, laughed, finished their drinks, and all four of them walked out of the bar. They left the napkin on the table, so I went over and looked at it. It said, "Hello, we are Mitch and Casey and want to know if you want a duck." I was dying laughing. I'm studying ASL interpreting. Some signs are very close to each other. For example, once I was trying to sign funeral procession and I instead signed ducking. Also, vegetable and virgin are almost the same. Hungry and horny are almost the same. I've made the sign for gyn on accident because it's literally making a triangle with your hands. ASL is amazing, but man, it's hard to learn sometimes, lol. I was at my local bar one night and a rather large group of deaf folks came in. It was a pretty slow night other than this group, and it was absolutely fascinating to see. These two gentlemen got into an argument and it was so interesting to see them so heated at each other yet completely silent other than their aggressive signing. It didn't escalate much more than shouting via signing, but it was definitely one of the most interesting nights at the bar. I'm hearing, but I went to RIT, NTID, for a couple of years a long time ago. Had a friend who would stutter. He would stutter in his signing at the same points that he would stutter vocally. It was more pronounced when he was drunk. Slurring was real, too. People's hands would barely move. The sign for fork is very close to that of leg. One time I was out with a deaf girl I had been seeing for some post-bar dinner. My interpretation skills aren't good to begin with, and when she made the motion towards her mouth with the lick sign, I got to thinking about making up a story about sign language for this post. After a few drinks, my deaf colleagues sometimes sign to other deaf people speaking in sign language. "Sorry, can't hear you." As a child I was mute, and one time I got really angry and was signing to my dad with really large gestures and he signed back, "Don't yell at me." Nowadays I sometimes just sign at him, "Don't yell at me," to make fun of him. One of my best friends from high school was deaf but had very limited hearing while using aids. He didn't sign and was pretty solid with speaking, would read lips to communicate. He told me he was kind of shunned by the deaf community for this, which is a separate but really sad thing. I was there for his first time drinking. We were 18 and at a wealthy classmate's house. Her dad was a former NFL player. What ensued was one of the most ridiculous nights of communication ever. Since he was drunk, he had trouble seeing straight and had the spins. I tried to ask him, deaf friend's name, are you okay? He read it as deaf friend's name, are you gay? He then proceeded to tell every girl at the party, very loudly and incoherently, how he definitely wasn't gay and liked girls, and was willing to prove he isn't with any girl who would give him a shot. Cut to an hour later. He is throwing up in the toilet, while half sobbing and yelling, I'm not gay, I'm deaf, you assholes. At one point that night he punched me in the balls in anger for thinking I thought he was gay, and then when I told him that seems like kind of a gay thing to do, well, let's just say he went back to drinking even more, which resulted in more incoherent ranting and yelling about not being gay. It wasn't until the next day that I realized my question prompted him to go on a tirade. I still feel bad about it to this day. One of the best kids I ever met. Really felt bad that his life probably had many moments like that where a word was taken in the wrong context, and if he wasn't bold enough to confront it, was probably trapped thinking someone said or thought something ill or negative about him. I hope you are doing well, my friend. I'm sorry I accidentally made you address your sexuality to a group of 18-year-old drunk high school students. Making a guess. Backhand index finger pointing right. Okay hand. That's the only message they'd understand when drunk enough. I have another question. If you do BSDM with a drunk deaf girl, what's the safe word? Any sort of visual cue can work. Winking 3 times, mouthing something, whatever. If the sub is deaf but the dom isn't, they can make a noise if they need to. Hearing person here, but conversational in ASL. One time I meant to sign where do you work, instead I signed where do you duck. The answer to both was at home. Usually they just babbled like it doesn't mean anything, just straight up nonsense, like mother chicken bitch Friday taxi. Apparently he wanted a ride because he couldn't drive. Poor dude was drunk. Because drunk people slur their words, it is very difficult for me to read their lips. Also, this is not a drunk thing, but some people talk slowly to try to help me, but it actually makes it very difficult to read their lips. I had one girl try to whisper in my ear because the music was loud, but it is much easier to just talk normally from a normal distance. That's probably the hardest thing, when the music is loud, so I have to whisper in their ear and they talk normally back to me. If the girl knows Morse code, then I'll write on a napkin and tell them to touch me in Morse code for easier communication. This sometimes helps me sleep with hearing women that know Morse code by telling them to suck my lick and dits and das. Sometimes the women understand this as a pickup line, but occasionally the woman will suck my lick in Morse code without any sexual undertones, which is very strange, you know. I also am not very good at Morse code, so the lick sucking will distract me from trying to understand what they are saying. One time a woman blew me in Morse code and I wasn't paying attention, so when she looked up for an answer I came in her face. But that's life for a deaf person, I guess. Tip: don't make up your own signs. Our autistic son was learning sign at a school for the deaf. His new teacher taught the kids twinkle, twinkle little star. She did not know the sign for diamond and improvised by putting thumbs together and 4 fingers together, creating a diamond shape. Hint: this is not the sign for diamond. When the program for parents came around, the deal parents were surprised to see them sign like a diner in the sky. Hysterical.